Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 23rd Hong Kong Forum. While the RCEP agreement signed between China, ASEAN, and key Asia-Pacific nations has created promising new business opportunities, the robust development of GBA has also reinforced and strengthened the role of Hong Kong as an international innovations and business hub connecting the GBA, the RCEP economies, as well as the rest of the world. In view of the latest regional development and challenges, the SMEs are devising corporate strategies to maintain corporate resilience and competitiveness while seizing the emerging business opportunities. A panel of business leaders will examine the Asia opportunities in the post-pandemic era, driven by RCEP and GBA opportunities, especially in innovation and sustainability. We are delighted to have Ms. Stacy Chow, Director and Asia-Pacific Regional Lead for Business and Society, Brunswick Group, to moderate the session for us. May I invite Ms. Stacy Chow to join us on stage.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 23rd Hong Kong Forum. It's a real honor for me to be moderating today's plenary session. As we're heading into the end of 2022, Hong Kong is entering a very exciting juncture of reopening, of reconnecting. Hong Kong companies looking at international opportunities and global companies here and tuning in virtually, looking at opportunities to trade, invest in, do business here in Hong Kong and across the Asia-Pacific region. And if there's one word to describe Hong Kong, it would be resilient. And looking ahead, there are a lot of opportunities that we should be excited about. One bright spot that we'll talk about in today's panel is around sustainability. A transition to a low-carbon, low-waste economy brings with it opportunities around energy efficiency, clean and renewable energy, circular economy, underpinned by sustainable finance. Another bright area, innovation, digitization, which has accelerated and is transforming every sector and every industry. And we just heard earlier, another opportunity would be arts and culture and well-being. And definitely the opportunities around furthering connectivity and partnerships through trade and investment. Case in point would be the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP, which came into force earlier this year, the largest trade agreement in the world, covering 30% of global trade and 30% of global GDP in 15 countries. That brings a lot of opportunities around tariff reduction and trade facilitation, and also the Greater Bay Area in terms of that ecosystem of innovators, incubators, and accelerators that will bring a lot of opportunities to Hong Kong. However, we've also heard earlier that there are a lot of challenges. So let's be honest, when we look around us, we are still in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. There's international economic volatility, rising inflation, rising interest rates. There is a lot of technological disruptions that seem to happen so quickly, environmental challenges, geopolitical tensions, and a very complex and fast-evolving socioeconomic operating environment that we can all see looking at the headlines every single day and requires ongoing monitoring. All of these challenges continue to impact businesses' supply chains, operations, continuity planning, and employee well-being. So, in today's session, we're really excited to look at three topics, and I'm going to introduce you to our panel of experts and speakers and movers and shakers of Hong Kong. The first topic is around where are and what are the market opportunities and trends that are driving future growth. The second is around how can companies and business leaders build resilience and competitiveness in the face of all the challenges that we see around us. And third, how are companies leveraging partnerships like the RCEP, like GBA and others, to look at connectivity and partnerships. So let me introduce you to our well-esteemed panel of speakers. I'm going to call them one at a time, and they're going to come on stage. Let me introduce you to Ms. Dee Poon, President for Brands and Distribution of Esquel Group. Please give a warm welcome to Dee. We have Mr. Bertrand Chan, CEO for Global Shipping Business Network. Ms. Sonia Chang, CEO, Rosewood Hotel Group and Vice Chairman of Chow Tai Fook Jewelry Group. And Ms. Tracy Wong Harris, Managing Director and Head of Sustainable Finance for Asia Standard Chartered Bank. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Warm applause for Sonia Chang and Tracy Wong Harris. Great. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining. I think I can see all of you. It's very exciting to finally have an in-person event here with such a group of international business leaders here. I'm sure everyone is interested to hear, as we're looking ahead and coming out of the COVID pandemic, what does the post-pandemic world look like to all of you? And as you look at 2023, can you talk through, what does business look like for you right now? Maybe I'll start with the hospitality and travel industry, Sonia, since a lot of our visitors here just arrived in Hong Kong. It would be interesting to hear, what do you think about the industry?
Yeah, thank you. So Rosewood has seen very strong recovery post the pandemic in international markets, particularly regions that have eased their restrictions quicker. In the US, Caribbean, Europe, you're seeing occupancy and rates actually surpassing pre-COVID level. And I think that really is a very strong sign and offers a blueprint for how Hong Kong and this part of the region will recover. And in terms of Hong Kong, I'm particularly optimistic about the recovery of Hong Kong. I think Hong Kong is in a very unique position. Its connectivity is really its vital strength. It's also really resilient, even though it has been a very challenging time in the hospitality industry in the last couple of years. You can see how Hong Kong really is quickly to react to different restrictions. And when we relax the restrictions, we're very fast in adapting. Whether it's the airline business, the travel agencies immediately launch recruitment drives. We launch different travel products to cater to local consumers, to discover Hong Kong and driving staycations. And then, of course, I think the opening up of mainland is what we are all looking to look forward to happen, and that's a world of opportunity. And when the restrictions relaxed last couple months, Rosewood has been the first global company actually hosting a global leadership forum in Hong Kong, and the feedback was amazing. We have global leaders in the company around the world coming to Hong Kong, and they were complimenting the seamless experience at the airport, the amazing experience in Hong Kong. And I think talking to a lot of the global clients that we have in all our markets, there's a really significant pent-up demand for coming back to Hong Kong and waiting to come back to Hong Kong. So overall, we're very positive and very optimistic about the future of travel.
Great, and we'll come back to you because it'll be interesting to hear, because Rosewood has a global business footprint. How do you see, market trends as well? But, sticking with the next step after you get to your hotels would be with a mask-on activity is shopping, as we heard. So I'm really curious, maybe Dee can talk a little bit about kind of the recovery in the consumer retail sector. From your perspective, where are we?
I think, the COVID era really launched a global era of what we might call the never normal. As we emerge from COVID, I think that brings to the foreground now some of the changes that the world has really seen or started to see in the past few years. So, I think climate change has been something that has been on a lot of our minds, I think, since An Inconvenient Truth, which came out when I was in college over 20 years ago. But it's really been these past few years, right, that we've seen shock after shock to our systems globally. I think in terms of people, the pandemic put so much stress on people, and especially on women. And we really had to question how we take care of our workforces. And so as we enter this post-pandemic era in Hong Kong, and many of us probably still work with countries or a country that still is very COVID not past COVID, let's just say, still more protective with COVID. So with China, I think this idea of how we balance moving forward in a world that has become more unequal, more unstable, with a desire to consume in new ways after we've learned that perhaps objects are not what will bring us satisfaction, is going to be something, I don't want to say challenging or interesting. I mean, I think it's an area of innovation and an area where we can really consider how to transform our businesses. I don't think this is a question of just, there's going to be 30% more people here and 20%. It's not, I don't think that's what the recovery is about. I think the recovery in consumer markets is about understanding what type of products a post-pandemic consumer will want, and then really trying to build offerings around that.
Yeah, so it sounds like post-pandemic, never normal, but looking for something that's more of value in terms of the consumer market. And I'd love to hear, Tracy, what do you think about what's happening in the world of finance, banking, your Standard Chartered bank hat, and then also Bertrand for shipping and trade. It'll be great to hear both of your views too.
Sure. I think banking, compared to Sonia and Dee, we thank you for technology and how advanced we are in terms of flexible working. So the switch between, physical meeting with clients or colleagues and then switch completely virtually, I think that's relatively smoothly. I think we've gone through that. And since the opening, second half of this year, physical meeting on the ground pretty much back to normal. And then business trip has started. So slowly, gradually, all the business trip is starting to pick up. And then going into 2023, I think it will be a lot more coming on board across Asia and across the globe. And I think large get-together conferences like this is also, we have seen quite a few significant big ones in the last 2 months. So I guess it's all going on track to back to normal.
Great. Bertrand, shipping, trade, are we really back to normal? There were a lot of supply chain disruptions. How are we doing?
Well, actually, I think shipping is probably the only industry that made a bumper profit over the last 3 years compared to the other industry. Unfortunately, to the detriment of corporation, SMEs who are producing or retailer in US or buying. So what we're seeing right now is quickly a normalization of the freight rates, so price going down quite quickly. However, as I think Stacey mentioned earlier, the geopolitics and then the tension that has arisen after COVID-19 crisis, this is not going away. So supply chain disruption, a lot of the companies right now are thinking about how do we actually make sure that our supply chain become more resilient? How do we don't have one single dependency, and how do we diversify our risk? So what that means actually from the shipping industry is after the last, let's say 2 years, bumper years of profit will actually be more normalized. But then the shipping and how to compete more on the how much value and how much service they can provide to the user, right, the shippers. And one aspect to that is digitization, technology, so better use of technology. So I'm sure all you have seen those pictures of like hundreds of container shipping line waiting in the queue at the terminal of Los Angeles and Long Beach. So this kind of thing is happening because that's an industry that has not digitized as fast or as much as it should have. And then now I think there's a wake-up call. Everybody realized that they have to digitize more. So that's why for GSBN, we are providing a blockchain network, blockchain infrastructure to help data exchange between shipping line, terminal operator, freight forwarder, and shippers. And hopefully, with this momentum, we can help this industry become much more digitized.
Sounds like post-pandemic, there's been a shift, a wake-up call, Bertrand, that you just mentioned, around more digitization. Dee, you mentioned more focus on sustainability. Can you all dive a little bit deeper, where are the market opportunities then that you're seeing and moving forward? We want to take a look at what are the drivers of these market opportunities as well. Maybe Dee, starting with you. I mean, you're seeing sustainability as a trend. What's driving that?
I think the problem is that we're not seeing sustainability as a trend. We're seeing a lot of noise about climate and about the need to do something about climate. But to be very honest, green products are a hygiene factor today. They do not move product, okay? So I think that's an interesting position to be in. I mean, I think obviously that will create some demand for sustainable product insofar as you cannot not have it, but it does not allow you greater price. Where I think there is opportunity is actually it's interesting. So we're here today because of RCEP, and so I thought a lot about this. I was like, what is RCEP about, and how does this help us? And actually, if we think about it, RCEP is the first trade platform that treats Asia including China, as both consumers and manufacturers. And so, I run a brand business out of what is traditionally an OEM manufacturer. And historically, brands like this existed, but not in any real way. So they existed as platforms to push product, but they never really grew to significance, right? So the brands of this region that are large and that are dominant are still really primarily brands and not this connected brand plus supply chain moment. And I think what is interesting today is, when we look at our region as both producer and consumer, it really changes the way we think about how we're going to build product, make product, like what that means. And I think the opportunity comes in our ability to capture the innovative spirit in bringing much more collaboration and speed to market and customization for the Asian consumer.
Yeah, so I'm going to come back to RCEP, but Tracy, I'm going to go to you because we just heard there's a lot of noise around sustainability. It doesn't move product. Does it move sustainable finance in your view?
Well, let's put some numbers out there. I love this challenge. So as of now, close to 140 countries has announced their either considering or announced their net zero targets. And that's close to 90% of the world's carbon emissions. Now, the opportunity, in order for us to achieve net zero, how much do we need? The latest estimates require 150 trillion US dollar in order to fill this gap. So the opportunity is huge. So let's take a look at where we are. Looking past to the past decade, we have seen tremendous growth in the sustainable finance market. Last year, 2021, it has hit over 1.7 trillion, which in terms of growth, it was double globally and in Asia 3 times. But then Dean is right. We are looking at a 150 trillion gap, but the market as 1.7 trillion. So the upside, the opportunity is still huge. So that I agree. And in terms of where the developments, in terms of thematic, so we mentioned green. So this is green, people use green as a general term these days. So I would say the market has developed from green to rainbow. What does it mean? So from green, so very early stage that we've seen green loans and green bonds, and to GSS, green social sustainability. We go back to social. Sustainability is a mix between the green and social. And then in the last few years, we have seen a tremendous growth in sustainability link, moving away from use of proceeds. So your money channeling to what are the green projects, ring fence to the green use or social use, to link to tie to a company's sustainability aspiration. And on pricing, very quickly on pricing here. So at the markets right now, use of POP-SIP products are pretty much trading at the same price as traditional product. Absolutely right. But we see benefit from bringing in the diversifications and increase of investor interest. So you will hear even Hong Kong, the government issue green bond, you always hear is 5 times oversubscribed, 7 times oversubscribed. That shows the demands for this product. Now, moving back to the linked product, actually, the sustainability linked product is tied to pricing. So if the borrower can deliver this target, predefined target, then they are able to enjoy some pricing benefit. But if they miss the target, some require you to deliver the penalty as well. And all the way, if I share, I said green to rainbow, from G to GSS to SLL, and the last category is transitions. So how high carbon intensive industry, including shipping, on moving to net zero. So that high transition industry is the most nascent, but a lot of attentions right now. So I think I'll stop here, happy to share more.
So we learn a lot about sustainable finance from Tracy because she also has a role in the Hong Kong Green Finance Association. So that was a very good overview. I mean, what's driving this sustainability kind of interest is also because of next-gen consumers, next-gen investors. I mean, Sonia, are you seeing that as a market trend when you're looking at Rosewood's offering? What are some of the market trends and what's driving that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that nowadays the Gen Z and millennials, they are looking for different experiences. I think first and foremost is they're looking for companies with a very strong purpose-driven agenda, and it's a purpose-led organization. So whether it's from a consumer perspective or from an employee perspective, building a purpose-led organization is now a very hot topic, meaning that consumers are really looking at supporting companies and brands that have that strong sense of value, that has a deeper connection, and really bring something meaningful to the community and the society. And relating to that is sustainability and impact. And I think that for Rosewood, for example, on sustainability, we're committed to carbon neutrality by 2050 across all our properties. We would weave in our impact agenda into our guest experiences, and that's expected by our consumers and our guests. So, for example, our Rosewood Sao Paulo project is actually the largest upcycling project in the whole of Brazil. We planted 10,000 trees, for example. Our Italian restaurant that we just opened in Hong Kong, Blue House, for example, hopefully all of you will try after the Amber Code, is actually a first impact venture restaurant in Hong Kong, where we launched an opportunity employment program, where we're supporting and hiring underserved groups from the neighborhood communities to work in our restaurant. We also donate 1% of the revenue to the neighborhood communities to build resilience as well. We also, during the pandemic, for example, launched Staycation for Good, which is a staycation, but with an element of education and advocacy to educate our guests about impact and our impact agenda. And so weaving these into the guest experience and in hospitality is increasingly important. And I think that in addition to that, in addition to impact, digital is a very important part as well for the Gen Zs and millennial. They're all very digital savvy, as you know. So we are also building Room of the Future, where we're exploring and researching in terms of how we can build more intuitive experiences in our guest rooms for our customers as well. Whether it's sensory technology, whether it's guest-driven, temperature control, for example, that is much more intuitive. And then over COVID, I think it really accelerated our digital transformation program, where we were thinking about how do we connect our guests without them even needing to step into our premises and our hotels. So that really fast-tracked our retail platform, expanding our ecosystem on connecting and delivering Rosewood experiences to their homes. So all of these are increasingly important and market opportunities for the Gen Zs and millennials, and really looking at the hospitality space where it's not just a place for people to stay, but really an ecosystem that curates amazing experiences, that connects the customers with the destination. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for more personalization. They're looking for a platform and a curator to understand and learn and discover different destinations around the world.
Very helpful. So digitization, Bertrand, are you seeing that in shipping? And those are very concrete examples. How are you digitizing shipping? It'll be interesting to hear.
Sure. I think Tracy just called out the shipping for the pollution, and I'd like to address that
Yes,
also first
address
off.
that.
So first off, yes, shipping is probably one of the biggest polluter in terms of the fuel that's being used. It's very bad for the environment. But if you put into context, I think the greenhouse gas effect that's emitted by the shipping industry is only 3% of the global greenhouse gas. Nevertheless, I think there is right now a big focus among all the shipping line to reduce and to transition from those dirty fuel to better bunker fuel. So two aspects to that. One is maybe switching to methane or ammonia. The issue with that is you need a global coordination, and that's actually really difficult to do. And some of the shipping lines say, why should we be the first one to do something? And so there's kind of this lack of coordination, if you will. In terms of opportunity that we see right now for the shipping industry, as again I mentioned earlier, the last 2 years has been really bumper profits for the shipping line, but also they realize that the customer really needs more help compared to before, in the sense that supply chain become more complex, you need more resiliency, you need more redundancy. So I see two strategies the shipping line going after. One is actually to acquire more business, to build either other line of business such as opening air cargo. For instance, some of the shipping line are becoming also cargo freighter. Some other will say, I'll go upstream or downstream. I'll buy maybe some warehouse. I provide some freight forwarder services. So that's one approach, which is quite capex heavy, quite difficult to do, to be honest. And also it's hard to trust a shipping line if they also be your freight forwarders, to be honest. The other approach, I think, is digitization. And that's where I think they're the most interesting that we're seeing. So one concrete example of digitization, for instance, is something I'm sure you guys actually will probably all be familiar with for the last 2 years on crypto exchange going up, is the concept of NFTs. So NFTs for, let's say, the monkey pictures or whatever digital asset that you've heard, to me, actually doesn't have that much social value. But if you use the same technology, NFTs for trade documents, such as bill of lading, commercial invoice, different type of documentation that's always required to do trade, which is actually all based on paper. You can switch that to electronic format. That has a very big impact. So one aspect innovation I'm the most bullish on over the next, let's say, 5-6 years is the getting rid completely of paper documentation to conduct trade. And in order to do that, you're gonna need blockchain or electronic technology to do it. And that's something where we start to see a lot of uptake and people going for that. The main reason for that was over the last 2 years, any type of process that rely on paper, people to physically go deliver a piece of paper in order to release container just doesn't work because of COVID-19. And if you switch to something that's more digital, that actually has direct impact. And I think that's something that we'll see much more of over the next few years.
Are you seeing the use of blockchain to monitor your greenhouse gas emissions as well, in addition to digitizing trade?
That's actually, I think, one of the use case I think that a lot of people are looking at. Right? I think there's a bunch of carbon credit tracking on blockchain using NFTs. Personally, I'm a bit skeptical. The main reason is it has to do with who's the one who issued those tokens, who's the one who write this thing on the blockchain. So the aspect I'll be more bullish on is if you, let's say, initiative of Hong Kong Exchange, Core Climate, I think that's the exchange, Core Climate, right? Yeah. This makes much more sense to me if you have, let's say, an exchange that's reputable, working with other party who are also reputable, who are the issuer of those credits, then that's gonna make sense to me. If you want to switch to purely blockchain, decentralized way to capture those information, the key question is if you have garbage in, you have garbage out. So you're not sure what you're tracking anymore in the end. I think that's the biggest hurdle. But definitely one of the use cases that we are also looking at people asking for GSBN is, can we start to capture more information relating to the ESG impact of the supply chain? If you have a transparent way to collect all this information, you can have potentially auditor coming and audit the impact, and that's something that people can verify independently, not depending on a company to disclose information over Excel spreadsheet or doing some audits. You can check down blockchain directly.
Yeah, very interesting. We have questions coming in. If you have questions, please do scan. I think there's a QR code and do submit your questions. We'll get to that in the last 20 minutes of this session. Now, I know that Dee, you mentioned RCEP as already. Let's get to the opportunity of what RCEP, GBA, how does that present an opportunity for your companies? Does it present an opportunity? And how?
Sure. I guess since it's a trade deal, I think probably it's more my wheelhouse. So as you mentioned, RCEP is probably one of the most important trade deal that has happened over the last few years, right? In terms of the magnitude of the trade deal is very impactful. I think maybe one way to think about it is, what does it represent for Hong Kong? As Hong Kong is kind of a super connector in the past between, let's say, outside world with China for capital market perspective. If you want to do business in China, you come to Hong Kong to do business here. You have more financial certainty, a lot of things handled within Hong Kong. I think what RCEP is really trying to do is, if we move away from a market where it's China to Europe or to US, but more a lot of new flow intra-Asia, then Hong Kong again play a very interesting role, right? Where in the perennial comparison between Hong Kong and Singapore, Singapore was for Southeast Asia, Hong Kong was more for China. But now I think with RCEP, actually Hong Kong can address really all those type of trade flow. And then the other thing, I think also is the theme of the talk today about GBA, is you really have sort of more allocation of what type of work Hong Kong will be uniquely suited for, and what are the work that you benefit from maybe the offloading that to GBA. So let me be more clear about what I mean by that. So I think one of the unique strengths of Hong Kong is the financial market, right? So I think Hong Kong is well known as being financial center, and that there's no doubt in that. And even with the last 2 years challenges, I think that still remains a very viable situation. Now, for shipping, for terminal operation, for manufacturing, I won't say Hong Kong is a global leader, right? And at GBA, if you look at the terminal of Yantian in Guangzhou, the volume of transportation is much, much higher. You have more manufacturing there. However, I believe the opportunity of the next 10 years for shipping is to move more to ancillary services. So it's not about who is the best at handling boxes, right? It's about who can help facilitate the shipment, who can help facilitate the trade. And Hong Kong, from the financial aspect, is definitely have a huge advantage compared to other people. So the aspect I think is exciting in Hong Kong is to more focus on trade finance, how to help SMEs get more financing to facilitate trade. And to that, there's a lot of application. You can think about, let's say, what has been announced, the Hong Kong FinTech Week, more digital asset in Hong Kong, which is actually a new way to potentially do trade finance. You can think about a sustainable finance aspect, because also that's one aspect of trade finance, make sure that the trade you're financing is actually good for the environment, for instance. So I think that's really the exciting opportunity for Hong Kong, for RCEP.
Yeah. Tracy, what do you think? How are companies actually working in the GBA, for instance, from your perspective?
I want to take a moment to respond to the shipping industry. Actually, shipping industry, yes, is one of the high carbon intensive industry. However, the opportunity of transition is huge. And the benefit I see, and over actually past year or 18 months, we see transactions. We have seen shipping operator, ship owners, how they accelerate and to beat the energy efficiency curve of the shipping industry association set for themselves. So I mentioned the sustainability link structure earlier. So we will be looking at a 10 years financing where every year the shipping company will come back to us and say, hey, we are actually, our energy efficiency is actually doing better than what the shipping industry asking us to do. And they have a very clear pathway to go to net zero. So I think that is very encouraging to see from the shipping industry. I thought I just want to respond to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, coming back to GBAs, I'm glad you asked this question. So at Standard Chartered, we are working on a thought leadership research on looking at, in the Greater Bay City, what is the decarbonization pathway for GBA? And then how financing can accelerate this process. And we're publishing the research in Q1, but the early finding has pointed out that, so GBA is accounting for about 5% of the whole China carbon emissions. And to achieve the 30-60, so peak at 2030 and neutrality by 2060, it requires another $2 trillion investments to go into GBA alone. And some of the industry opportunity segment that we found in transportation, in building sectors, and also in some of the industry like manufacturing and petrochemical industry. So we will be sharing more about this funding later. I also want to bring in the GBA GFA, the Greater Bay Area Green Finance Alliance. This is a collaboration among the 4 GBA cities, so Hong Kong, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Macau. Essentially, this is a platform collaborations among the city to drive green and sustainable finance research and innovative products. And like REC, so like the RCEP, so it serves a role to really strengthen the collaborations among the city. And going back to what Bennett mentions about Hong Kong's role, so of course, as a super connector, as an international finance center, as a city that have very well established financial and regulatory infrastructure, we have a key role to play in accelerating and matching international capital to where the project is needed.
Very helpful. Sonia, any views on GBA or RCEP for tourism, in your view?
Yeah, I think a hot topic is cultural tourism, and I think where the opportunities are. Just take a little step back of what cultural tourism is. It's the opportunity of immersing visitors and travelers into the destination of the destination and the culture and heritage and history of a place. And Hong Kong really presents an exciting opportunity, be that super connector, and really connects with the world and helps promote Chinese heritage, art, and culture. And going back to Xi's policy address, right? He mentioned that Hong Kong is an East meet West center, and there's a very unique proposition that not many cities can have. And with an ecosystem with GBA of 11 cities, it presents tremendous opportunity. And Hong Kong already is starting a lot of exchange and cultural collaborations, our build-up of the West Kowloon, opening a Palace Museum. There's a lot of opportunities for Hong Kong to really play a role to really connect the world and GBA and really promoting arts and culture, particularly Chinese culture. And I think there's also opportunities for Hong Kong talent to play a role. If you think about Hong Kong, we have best-in-class global institutions, global events, whereas GBA has a lot of natural resources, culture, heritage. So the combined presents a tremendous strength and tremendous opportunity. And we can also look at leveraging Hong Kong talent to look at opportunities in GBA as well. And then going to RCEP, I think, because Rosewood is in 8 countries in Asia, in the ASEAN countries, and I think it presents a tremendous opportunity that Hong Kong is joining RCEP and really play that role of culture and economic conduit, and hopefully can promote more strategic opportunities with our major trade partners in the ASEAN countries. So I'm quite optimistic and very positive about the opportunities with GBA and RCEP.
That's helpful. So when we look at RCEP, GBA as terms, I thought it would be helpful to hear specifically what companies are doing with those partnerships. And that was a very, very clear way of how sustainable finance, cultural tourism, shipping hub, and also Dee, what you were mentioning, connecting consumers and manufacturers. It was very helpful to see that and hear that specifically. I want to move to how you're dealing with challenges. And specifically, we just talked about how Hong Kong is known for being resilient. It has been a very challenging few years, let's be honest, and quite frankly, globally, it's very challenging and volatile all over the world. So can you tell us a little bit about how are you managing as business leaders to keep your teams competitive, your companies competitive, and how are you building that resilience to deal with this very messy, volatile world we're in? Who wants to go first? Who wants to take up the challenge? Dee, do you want to go first? Bertrand, Dee? Go ahead.
Lady first.
Dee, go first.
I think the answer is with both a sense of urgency, but a great deal of empathy and compassion. I think, it's obviously been a very difficult few years. And when we think about, if you everybody take a big breath and go backwards to what it was like Chinese New Year 2020, right? And then just imagine those few months. And I think what we saw was that people basically just took, at least at our company, we were very lucky insofar as leaders took a big, deep breath and just went after solving the problems, right? So I remember very clearly, we came back, it was Chinese New Year lunch, we're all sitting there, we're like, oh my God, what is going on? And we'd gotten a call, and it was to my mother, and it was a friend saying, you must make masks. And my mother looked at her PA and said, write this down and find me a paper, and you're gonna write me a paper about why we make clothes, we do not make masks, okay? And we sit down at lunch, and the PA is sitting opposite me. Actually, yeah, I said, hey, you've just been tasked to tell Margie how to tell her friend that we cannot make masks. And we're sitting and this is a senior management lunch, and the guy is, oh yeah, everybody's into making masks. My friend just managed to do this, and that person just did this. And within 45 minutes, we'd come together and realize, wait, we can make masks. And I think, I'm not gonna tell the whole story, but let's just say about 20 days later, we had 100,000 masks, cotton masks that we'd tested that basically, they're not N95s, they're N90s. Okay, they're reusable up to 50 times, they're antibacterial and antiviral. So from there, we just kept on swinging and swinging. And whether it was factories in Vietnam I think they were the first to live on campus, or supply chain disruptions in various places. In the beginning, it was pure adrenaline. And then people started getting tired. And so I think the question is, you can move on the basis of purpose, on passion, on belief. I think one of the reasons we were so able to mobilize our management teams was because they genuinely believed that we have a responsibility to take care of both our customers as well as our workers and our workforce. If we don't provide work, these people go hungry. And if we've made a promise to a customer, we've got to deliver that, right? But at some point, you're running. I mean, how long can you swim against a tide? And as you remember, it did not stop, and it has not stopped for 2.5 years. That's when you start to really think about this moment of team building, of compassion, of leadership, because that is what I think has really transformed within our organization over the last 2 years. And many of the things we talked about for 10 years, digitalization, more flexible, things that could never be done, we had to do them. And so when you look at a company, an industry, a world that is being shocked into new ways of working under new types of pressure, what does that require? It requires mental resilience, right? And this is on top of a background where everybody is dealing with the stress of not knowing what this virus could bring to them physically, to their family members physically, and also dealing with issues, particularly at home with children, homeschooling, or needing to be cared for longer. If they didn't even have the access to homeschool, then you just still have to take care of them, right? So you have elderly, you have young people, and we have a lot of women in our organization, so understanding, as a woman, to understand what it's like to be the primary caregiver and being asked to deliver at work, it completely changed our mindsets. So, I think one of the big things going forward is, for many years, companies and institutions did not change. Things changed around them, within them, but at its core, how many people actually transformed? And as managers, we're passed on management styles from the people above us, and our institutions become wedded to those management styles, right? So you run we can talk about, at the factory level, we talk a lot about lean and asking workers to stop the line so that we can get higher quality output in one go. But that requires a transformation in the view of who a worker is and who a manager is, who a line leader is, and how they work together. I mean, from a pyramid structure, we're now moving into constellation structures. And I think if you ask us how we stayed resilient, was by letting loose a lot of new energy and by senior people being willing or really being willing to transform and adapt and allow young people and their new ways of thinking, of doing, to come to the foreground. Now, this was hard for everybody. And again, external circumstances, you know how hard it is to change the way you work? And so I think with that was a lot of empathy. And it required a lot of empathy as managers, as staff, as people trying to move through transition amongst each other so that we could do these things in new ways.
Yeah, I think post-COVID, a lot of companies and leaders here can also understand and empathize that there's a speed and agility that's been added on, and empathy and the leadership style that Dee was talking about, on top of delivering on operations. It is challenging to be a leader, I think, right now. Any views on how your companies are staying competitive and resilient during this time and the last few years?
I think one thing, just maybe more narrow down, just on the technology space, right? The innovation space, let's say. I think what's really significant is over the, let's say, 5-6 years, it's really hard to get people to do digitization for the shipping industry. Let's be honest, because shipping industry is not very tech-driven, let's say. Everybody goes to tech company. What we're seeing right now, a lot of the tech companies are laying off people who are very smart, who are very good programmer, but actually they don't need as much resources. So people actually, you can hire more people to help for digitization at a moment where a lot of industry actually have a lot of interesting opportunities. So that I think is a really interesting trend. It's not just in China, it's also in US, in Europe, everywhere. And the second thing, maybe more selfishly for myself, because we work on blockchain, right? So last year, we had so many people who wanted to hire, who was hired away by crypto exchanges to trade Bitcoin and Ethereum. And obviously, that trend completely reversed. So I think what's interesting is if Hong Kong can really, again, capture the opportunity to be a digital asset hub, you can really attract a lot of good talent come to Hong Kong and to help digitize a lot of the industry. So
yeah.
I think that's
Sonia and Tracy?
Yeah, so echoing what Dee was saying, I think thinking back in 2020, Chinese New Year, I remember flying from Japan and rush back to Hong Kong and host the crisis management meeting, and then days every day. As you know, hospitality was the hardest hit, right, industry over COVID, and we have globally 45 hotels around the world in different countries. So at that time, I think. My lesson learned is the key thing that we've learned is during these tough times and challenging times, it's very important that we put people first, It's very important that we immediately connect with our people, our talent, our workforce globally, and remain very transparent, have constant communication with them. At that time, a lot of the hospitality companies, as you know, immediately laid off a lot of people. I think that we need to be, we held a much more long-term view, and we think that that was the right approach. People at the end of the day is a long-term investment for the company, and the success of a company starts and ends with people. And some companies who immediately react and cut workforce to cut cost, understandably why. However, they bear the long-term consequences, because when the recovery actually came back very fast in Americas and Europe, they weren't able to hire people to come back to the business. And we instead have launched Emergency Assistance Fund to assist our colleagues around the world in different countries during the tough times. And they remember, and they stay with you. They stay with you. This actually builds culture. It builds a very strong value for the company, for the future. So I think my lesson learned really is we really have to put people first during challenging times, and also staying agile. I remember, at that time we were, in Hong Kong, for example, we didn't have any business, and we were scrambling to think about how do I fill up, 400 rooms at Roseau Hong Kong with the pandemic, and there's no travel coming back. So immediately we were one of the first hotel launching staycation, because I said, no one can travel, so let's make our hotel a summer resort, a summer vacation spot. And then every other hotel companies followed us. So it was a new experience for our colleagues and for our people, but they were very quick to adapt to it. And then it became a business for 2 years. And then I think the final thing is, because we learned about how important it is with talent, now talent has to be a core priority for companies, investing in future workforce and investing in future talent. So Roseau now is doing a lot of programs, partnering with VTC to invest in vocational training, launching programs with GBA to nurture talents. We launched a Roseau Scholar program, for example, to connect, and using our global network to connect talents in Hong Kong with global universities. So investing in talent ultimately is what builds the success of any companies and resilience.
Yeah, thank you. Tracy?
Yes, very quickly on this resilience point. So it really resonates me when Dean and Sonia share, and I immediately thought about my China team. So in the severe lockdown during China time, the core with my team, my staff, is survival. I mean, do you have enough food? And I think, from our credit to our senior management on the ground in China, we were calling our clients to ship food to our staff and our other clients, but not doing transaction. So this is the degree to how people work together during the difficult time. But coming back, I know that you're checking on the clock, so I want to go back to the competitiveness, companies and competitiveness in this environment. I think sustainability is a key. Sustainability for during COVID, now and the future, it will be the key for competitiveness and also the long-term survival for company. I want to share a little bit about from a bank perspective, how do we embed this? And then I will also share a little bit more from the product development as well, so that to give you a flavor on what is available in the markets, right? So from a bank's perspective, we embed sustainability as one of our core 4 pillars, and accelerating to zero is one of our public stance. So we have made public commitment to achieve net zero operationally by 2025, and finance emissions to net zero by 2050. And as anyone in the financial industry, you know that to achieve finance emission to net zero, meaning that every dollars I lend, my clients need to be net zero. So what do we do about it, and how are we going to help clients to transition so that we can transition? So with that, we have published a transition finance framework to dictate what are the eligible activities and projects that actually qualify in the transition well. And then also we have set aside a commitment of $300 billion in green and transition financing by 2030 to help our client to transition. Now, we also need to have the know-how and the people. So we have set up a, we call it transition accelerating squad. Essentially, these are the industry bankers knowing the high carbon industry very well and come and help our client to form the transition plans and what are the financing that we can use to associate with that. So this is how we approach this. And we publicly, so we measure and we publicly disclose what is the total absolute carbon emissions based on the 2020 number. And every year we will disclose and track and disclose to the world from that space. And on the product developments, I want to share the bonds and loans that you are very, very familiar with. But in addition to the bonds and loans in the sustainable finance market, we have a lot more products in terms of developments. So I think Bernard mentions supply chain. So in the trade finance, we also have offer in sustainable products. May that be from a use of proceed or to a link structure, and to VPP, vendor prepay program, where we're locking in the vendor with the supply chain and come up with a structure that work for suppliers as well. And on top of that, on ESG derivative and also on liability products. So on cash, sustainable cash deposit or current account, saving account can be in a sustainable way. So how do I put your cash to work into a green and sustainable asset? And last but not least, and Bernard actually mentioned earlier, so I hope you all have heard the news about the Hong Kong Stock Exchange have launched Core Climate, which is a voluntary carbon market platform to help to for the voluntary carbon trading. And from that, I hope that this news is being shared is a very significant moment for Hong Kong, and having a new innovative product to help really to channel and accelerate capital to projects that it needs for acceleration.
I think, Tracy, you just answered one of the questions from the audience as well around COP27 and climate finance and transition finance. I hope that answers that question. Looking at the questions from the audience, and thank you for everyone who submitted questions. We've been trying to weave it into this discussion. There's one that stood out as an immediate follow-up to all of your sharing around the COVID pandemic period in Hong Kong and the agility and the changes you've had to do for your business. There's a question around, in the future, how can Hong Kong do better to build resilience moving forward? What would be your one kind of advice or suggestion of how Hong Kong or how companies can build further resilience moving forward? Any views on that? And there was a point about talent. I don't know if you want to talk about, talent as a part of that discussion.
Yeah, I can talk about talent. I think, like I said, I think success and long-term sustainability, the future of Hong Kong starts and ends with people. So I think there's a huge topic, recently about how do we attract talent back to Hong Kong. I think we should stop and think about, first of all, before thinking about how to attract overseas talent back to Hong Kong, we have to think about that Hong Kong's fundamentals has not changed. Hong Kong, with its cultural dynamism, the way of life, its infrastructure, its natural beauty, cuisine, cultural offering, it's unbeatable. No, there's very, very few cities, if there's any, that can actually compare to Hong Kong. So naturally, I believe that overseas talents who have left Hong Kong will come back. And I think that we all have to play a role with our personal network, our businesses, to promote Hong Kong. And that will be an important factor. At Rosewood, for example, we build a very diverse workforce, and I also think that that's a huge retention with a diverse workforce, the diversity of a population. That's a key selling point of overseas talent willing to come back to Hong Kong. And then I think finally is, we often talk about the overseas talent, but let's not forget our talent in Hong Kong. They will be a tremendous talent base for the future of Hong Kong. So all of us have to invest in them, build programs for them, and develop future leaders for Hong Kong.
Great. We're running out of time. One additional point around
Sure.
talent, future resilience.
I think if you go back historically, Hong Kong is more dominated by immigrants, people living and coming, right? And historically, anytime there's a big challenge, Hong Kong tend to attract risk takers and people who are willing to take a chance. But what you need in exchange is a stable environment where the rules are clear, where you know exactly what you need to do to take those risks. So I think if Hong Kong wants to foster a more risk-taking in the future, we just need more clear rules, more resilient setup, so that, because I'm sure the next 10, 20 years, the world become increasingly more complex and more volatile. But what you need, if you have a place where you can take risk and build businesses where those rules are clear and you have the right regulatory framework to take those risks, that's a key place. Because I think what you see is, as situations become more complicated, most government will shy away to set up those very clear guidelines. And one example could be digital asset for cryptocurrency, for instance. But that's not the only one, right? Digitization, how to help people to make better decisions.
Great. 1 point, Dee, from you. What do you think?
I think what we need to do is we've got to teach Hong Kong and people in Hong Kong that failure is not a reason to stop doing things, and failure is your road to find a new way to succeed. What I believe will transform Hong Kong going forward and is required is really teaching people to get over themselves, and that we should let go of our fear of failure. Innovation requires failure, and we should not be perfectionists, and we've got to learn and teach our young people and our old people that, we will screw up, but that's okay, and we'll move on, and we'll try again, and we'll persevere.
Future resilience, Tracy?
Hong Kong as the sustainable finance center.
Very good. All right, to wrap, I know we have just 1 or 2 minutes. Can you all just give one tip or suggestion to everybody here in the audience? We have a lot of international businesses here. What do they need to do to think about succeeding in this market and in Asia-Pacific region? One word, but you cannot use RCEP or GBA because that's already in the title of the session. One word that you think that would be a tip for everybody in this audience. Who wants to go first?
It's easy one for me, sustainability.
Great, sustainability, one word.
Talent, world of opportunity.
Nice, and Bertrand?
So 1 word or 3 words?
Oh, one word or an acronym, but not GBA or RCEP, because we know that.
I think, innovation.
Innovation, and Dee?
I think my words need to be enjoy the ride.
Great. Well, with that, please join me in thanking the panel for their very personal sharing, as well as their perspective on what companies need to do to grab opportunities in the future and tackle challenges. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for all our panel speakers. Before we proceed to the next program, we will now have a group photo for all the guests on stage. Would all speakers please stand up and proceed to the stage front? Thank you. Thank you once again for the insightful sharing by all speakers. Next we'll have the networking sessions. For on-site participants, you are welcome to network and meet with other participants and business counterparts. For online participants, there will be a virtual networking session on the online platform. Please follow the steps below for joining the networking event. First, click the Back to Program List button underneath the video screen. Then click the Virtual Networking button at the top right corner to enter the networking lounge. You will then be able to connect with other participants. In case of any questions, please let our colleagues know. This is the end of today's program, and thank you for joining us here and online today.